Well, hello everyone. My name is Sharon Spencer with IAAP, and I want to welcome you all to the making of an accessible iOS app for non-visual access. Before we get started, I just want to quickly review a few system items. First off, everyone hopefully is logged into Adobe Connect, or you can follow along with the presentation that we provided and over the phone. To access the presentation, there is a handout link in the confirmation email you received when you registered, or in the reminder email that was sent out a few days ago. And the presentation for today, the PowerPoint presentation, was posted this morning, so you can access it through that link. During the webinar today, if you want to ask questions, our speakers do plan to stop for questions throughout and at the end. If you have a question, you can type it into Adobe Connect, or if you are not logged into Adobe Connect, you can email it to me at webinars@accessibilityassociation.org. For those with access to the chat area, just type into the text box or the chat area and hit enter or use the send icon. And when Frank and Scott get to a good stopping point, they'll address your comment or question. To guard against background noise, I have put everyone who is connected via the phone on mute. At the end of the webinar, if there's time, we will allow you to ask questions over the phone or through your microphone. And to do that on the phone, just press #6 to unmute your line, and *6 puts you back onto mute. If you're hearing audio over both your computer speakers and the phone, you can hang up the phone and listen via computer only, or you can turn off your computer speakers and listen via phone only. And when Frank is doing sharing his desktop, if you want to see either the PowerPoint or the desktop sharing more clearly, you can go into full screen mode. There is a full screen option. You just select that to get into full screen mode and then select it again to get out of full screen mode. You will need to get out of full screen mode in order to access the chat area. There's also a zoom in option, and that allows you to see a portion of the speaker's screen, and it follows the speaker's cursor. And I want to remind everybody that we will be recording this webinar. So again, thank you for joining us today for the making of an accessible iOS app for non-visual access. Our speakers today are Frank Hoey, Senior iOS Developer with Data Speech Solutions, and Scott White, Director of Sponsored Technology Programs for the National Federation of the Blind. Frank is a developer who has worked with web and mobile application design for over 15 years and has been very active in web and mobile accessibility for the last 10 years. And Scott has managed the NFB Newsline service for the National Federation of the Blind since 2006. So we are delighted to have Scott and Frank with us as today's speakers. So thank you both for doing this webinar for us, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Sharon, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Scott White, the Director of NFB Technology Services, and I'm going to go ahead through the slides. I'm going to skip the first slide here about the presenters because Sharon just did a great job introducing us, so thank you, Sharon. And then I'm going to go on to the next slide, which is talking about NFB Newsline, and turn it over to Scott for a few minutes.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for taking your time to join us today in learning how to make an accessible iOS app. It's a very important attribute to make all your apps very accessible. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, as was mentioned, I'm the Director of Sponsored Technology Programs for the National Federation of the Blind, and I've been doing that since around 2006. So for the past 10 years, I've been working on the NFB Newsline project, and I'll want to spend few minutes just telling you about what NFB Newsline is in a moment. just to give you a little bit of background, I am blind. I use the iOS product every day. I use iPhone. I recently was on a call with Apple, and I kidded them, and I said, I have one of everything that Apple makes. So I'm very integrated in with iOS and the accessibility features that use that. I also, prior to coming to work for the National Federation of the Blind, I spent about 10 years as a senior systems administrator for Circuit City stores when they were in business. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what is NFB Newsline? What does it offer? NFB Newsline is, I describe it as an audio information source. We currently have about 400 different publications that's broken up to a wide variety of different newspapers from different states, as well as we have national publications that you are familiar with, like New York Times, USA Today, Christian Science Monitor, Wall Street Journal. And then we have local state newspapers, about 2 from just about every state that's in the union. We also have things like breaking news sources. Of course, a lot of the different websites like Bloomberg and CNN and things like that have the breaking news on the websites, but often those websites are not going to be accessible, so we find that our subscribers really enjoy that type of breaking news coverage. We also have something that's very unique to us, and that's the emergency weather alerts. And we did that to make things, what we're talking about in a roundabout way today, accessibility, because if a blind person is watching TV and they hear the alert tones that are on the TV, then how do they know what actually the message is? And sometimes this is just a message of, maybe that's of some condition that's upcoming, and sometimes it could be as imperative to know what was going on as a tornado warning. So I can immediately go to NFB Newsline and do one of the access methods, either being the most predominant ones being either over the telephone or using the NFB Newsline Mobile, the iOS app that we're talking about today as a case study. That's the NFB Newsline. We currently have about 110,000 subscribers across the nation. There is also an associated handout that I provided Sharon that you have available that talks about some of the things that we do on NFB Newsline. We have about 38 million minutes that we did on the phone last year, and over the same time period we processed about almost 6 million online requests. So it's quite a fast service and used quite a bit by the individuals that are eligible for the service across the country. The access methods that we have, I mentioned the iPhone app, we have the telephone, we have other download access methods as you see there on the slides. We're about ready to release the next version of our NFB Newsline mobile app, and that's going to have things that we built in like the weather alert, and the emergency weather alerts were already there, but we figured that we wanted to make it available by putting a button on the home screen of the app where people could go ahead and access that. We're going to have other things like the retail ads that we have in other access forms. We're going to have that available. We're going to have some streamlining of things like TV listings, and probably one of the most important things we're going to have is a global search option where you can search all 400 of those publications. So that gives you sort of a quick, brief rundown of NFB Newsline.
Okay, so moving along, as you can see in the slide, what we're going to talk about today is developing an app for visually impaired. When I first developed the abstract for this presentation, there was 1.2 million apps on the App Store. That has since changed, obviously, with now more than 1.5 million apps available for download at the App Store. The responsibility to address accessibility of these apps is left on the developer. Apple has made strides in requiring these things, but the developers are really responsible for doing this. And unfortunately, some apps do not follow. Many do, and Apple has done a great job at making it extremely easy for developers. And in fact, developers sometimes have to go out of their way to make things not accessible. So Apple has done some good stuff with that. So during this webinar, we're going to discuss some of the standards for accessibility and some of the challenges from my point of view and other developers, I'm sure. So the learning objectives for today, we're gonna talk about built-in accessibility within iOS. We're also going to work with Apple iOS Simulator and some of the other development tools that Apple has provided. And then finally, we're gonna develop a very simple, accessible app, and it'll be clear on how easy it is to make something accessible and how difficult it is to make something that's not accessible. So the built-in accessibility for consumers that iOS and Apple has provided include VoiceOver, Siri, dictation, the speak screen, speak text. Along with that, there's the zoom functionality, there are font adjustments, and there are, the ability to invert colors in grayscale. Scott, from your point of view, do you use any of these, all of these?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm blind, so I use the VoiceOver. I've been using that since it came out with the first iPhone 3GS in 2009. And it was actually, when it first started out, the blindness community was saying, well, how are we going to ever be able to use a flat screen? How are you going to be able to use a piece of glass? Apple has done a tremendous job with actually coming up with methods that you can actually be able to use this. Let me give you a little rundown of how you actually execute some of the basic options with VoiceOver. When I have VoiceOver on the screen, first of all, if I were to go ahead and touch, and every iOS device has VoiceOver, and so once you go ahead and follow the instructions like that are on the Apple website to go ahead and turn that on, you can go ahead and use this, because that's the great thing about it. Any of the Apple products that I purchased, I'd have in prior years to 2009, I would have had to pay for add-ons to go ahead and add the accessibility in, but it's built in there, so that's fantastic. So if I were to go ahead and turn VoiceOver on, and if I were to, for example, go up to the messages icon or to the calendar icon, it's going to read me what's there. Now, to actually activate it, I will go ahead and do the double tap, and that will activate it. Now, of course, when a sighted user, they will just go ahead and touch it, but I don't know what it says until I touch it, so that's why it's not activating. I have to double tap on everything. Of course, a number of people some that I work with and some that some of my friends and so forth, they will turn on VoiceOver and they say, how do I get this off? Because see, the gestures are all totally different. So the way that you move around the screen, if I would move from icon to icon, would be a left to right swipe and to go forward, and a right to left swipe to go backwards. So that's just a brief couple of things that iOS does for you with VoiceOver.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So moving along, the next slide talks about the history of iOS accessibility. And as Scott mentioned, prior to 2009, it was extremely difficult to get any accessibility with the phone, and especially the touch screen. But in June 2009, with the release of the 3GS, that brought about what I think is a revolution in terms of accessibility for mobile devices. And every iteration, with the exception of the step back within iOS 8, Apple's done a great job at making improvements consistently. And as you can see, there's some listed here with the enhanced voices, the rotor options expansion, some keyboard improvements, and then finally the third-party keyboards, which is proven to be quite useful. With the recent release of iOS 9, there are some additional features that I've noticed, including the settings search. Prior to iOS 9, the settings was extremely difficult to navigate as far as I was concerned. But now using the settings search box, you're able to find, get quicker access to VoiceOver by simply typing in, the first few letters. There's also more voices, and the voices are, the speed of these voices are much faster than they were in previous versions. Scott, have you used iOS 9? Anything that you've noticed?
Oh, I'm one of those folks that has to upgrade on day one. So with all the different iOS versions that come out, and there were some improvements that I liked as the iOS version, but they weren't really anything generic. Although there were some enhancements done to the VoiceOver and so forth, there weren't anything that really impact me, that really stood out for my usage. I enjoyed to be able to use some of the different voices. That's probably the the thing that I liked. For example, in iOS 9, you could use actually the Siri voices if you wanted to use those. And what I do is, just to give my phone a different personality, is I switch, personal note here, I switch back and forth between the different voices. I have them all installed on my phone, so I can easily switch back and forth them. But as far as anything that's in iOS 9 specifically that I use as far as an accessibility item, there's really not anything else that really is standing out to me.
Okay. So moving along, we have, in the next slide, I'm talking about VoiceOver. And I won't assume everyone is familiar with it. Scott has talked about it. But VoiceOver is Apple's gesture-based screen reader. And its own description is it lets you enjoy the fun and simplicity of iOS, even if you can't see the screen. So with it enabled, with the shortcut to triple click on the home button to access it, you'll be able to hear the description of everything happening on the screen. Now, just because it's provided for you doesn't mean that it's going to be optimal. Developers do need to make it more than just what it is out of the box, but Apple makes it very easy to do that. And then my second bullet is, again, it's been 2009, so we're working on 6+ years of VoiceOver development, and I think it's going quite nicely. So we talked about built-in accessibility for consumers. Now let's switch the side to built-in accessibility options for developers. And my first bullet is it's 80%. And that's my estimation, is that everything is already accessible from a developer's point of view. And then only minor efforts are required to boost that percentage up to 100%. And it's quite easy, and we'll go over that later. Some other accessibility options for developers, there are captioning and audio descriptions that we have access to. Display customization, we can implement speech, voiceover, and guided access to those APIs. So why make apps accessible? Apple's response on their website is they give several reasons, including user base and potential legal guidelines. I add to that in terms of the consumer. If you're a business and you're putting something out there, the perception and the expectation that consumers have on businesses is I think, tantamount that they should provide these accessible features within their apps. And it's, from my personal point of view, it's irresponsible to not do that because it's so easy to do. So making your apps accessible, how do we go about doing that? So I'm just going to skip over that. A little technical stuff on the side. The base code that Apple provides developers is called the UI kit. And the controls that they provide, they have the accessibility enabled checkbox. So for each object that is on the screen that the user is either visually seeing or VoiceOver is going to be talking, there is an accessibility enabled checkbox. So if you check it, it is accessible. If you uncheck it, it is not accessible. Simple. I'll show, and I'll demo that in just a little bit. There's an accessibility label which would be spoken by VoiceOver if you choose to add it. A label is a short description of what the control or the object is. The accessibility hint is another short description of that control, but describes more of the action of that control. If it's a button, the hint may be to press the button or to swipe, something like that. And then you have the accessibility traits, which describe it. There's button, links, search fields, keyboards, and such forth, and behaviors for those traits that describe it. So there'll be static text and images, and some will play sounds, some will be selected. Scott?
Okay. Let me go ahead and just explain a little bit about the hint feature. The hints, you can think of it as sort of the online or the very interactive help type facility. So the hint is basically what it says. It's a hint that gives the user, and this is customizable. I can turn it off. Usually I do have it turned off, except when I'm exploring a new app. And the developer of the program may have put something in there that will assist me. So I usually will use it when I get a new app. But let's say that, and let's make something that we're familiar with, let's say when you go to messages or calendar like I was just talking about. Now, the hint that's associated with that is not that informative, but just to give you an example, it would say double tap to open. So somebody that's new to the app doesn't necessarily know I have to double tap this to open. So it's sort of the help message that you might want to associate with that particular icon or that button, or telling what will actually happen if the person will go ahead and double tap on that option.
Okay. Moving along, again, going a little technical, the UI accessibility programming interface that Apple provides, they claim it as the bridge between the app and accessibility. So this programming interface includes the UI accessibility informal protocol, the container informal protocol, the accessibility element class, and the constants headers. So these are all tools that the developer has access to further enhance the experience that visually impaired users will be able to go through. So how do you test? As a developer, one of the biggest frustrations is being able to test things. Apple provides some tools. I am a big Apple fan. I'm not as big of a fan of their testing tools that they provide for accessibility. They do provide an accessibility inspector. They provide simulators, which you can also turn on some accessibility controls, and they provide VoiceOver. I found as a developer, there's nothing that can replace the testing experience than just plain old getting it on your phone, turning on VoiceOver, and then running through it to make sure that everything is working the way it is. I've been caught several times by, as a sighted person, things will function perfectly for me, but then I'll give it to Scott, and he'll turn VoiceOver on, and before I had a chance to test it, and it works. It doesn't work at all. So I've been burned on that. So again, the testing is nothing replacing just turning on VoiceOver and going through it as a developer. Scott?
I would certainly echo those comments, but I would ask, I think as you're developing apps and you're developing your beta team that is going to do your testing, you certainly need to include somebody that is going to be using the accessibility. Now, of course, I'm blind, so I'm going to be using VoiceOver. It's also going to be good that has someone, there's a wide variety of degrees of blindness. So I'm totally blind, so I'm dependent on the VoiceOver to read to me what's on the screen. Someone else that may have partial sight may be using the zoom feature. And for other disabilities, they're going to be using the other accessibility options. So it's very important to go ahead and get actually testing results from those individuals. Let me give you an example of an app that I ran across and how frustrating it can be not to have accessibility. There was of course, there's a lot of video media type apps, and this was a video media app that I ran across. And of course, I could go ahead in the app just as, I didn't have to do anything else. This was straight just downloading the app. I could go ahead and I could find the movie. I could go ahead and play a preview for the movie. I could do all functions except the main one that's the purpose of the app, and that was to play the movie. So in fact, for whatever reason, VoiceOver didn't even see the control. Now, I was able to successfully, after I had somebody visually describe the screen to me, I was successfully able to understand where the placement of that app is and so forth, and still use it. But that is not what you want people to do. You want people to be able to easily find the button. Most, I will go ahead out on a limb and say that most people that would be using VoiceOver would not go to that level and could not go to that level to necessarily find the button and so forth. Because, you have, just like with any particular product, we're going to have people that really are highly technical skilled in using it, and you're going to have people that are just very basic, very novices to the iPhone, and we want to provide the user experience. Whatever market that you're catering to in the general population, you're going to have that same general population in persons with disabilities. So again, you're going to have people that have very little experience and knowledge that are novices with using the iOS device, and you're going to have people that are experts using the iOS device. But I just wanted to illustrate how irritating it can be if the app is, this app was about 95% accessible. So to go ahead and make it accessible would have been a small portion. But the one thing that it couldn't do, now if I'd been able to download the app and couldn't see the previews, should I have been able to? Yes, certainly 100% yes. But would it really affected the enjoyment? But see, this was something I was looking forward to. I downloaded this app, and then I go and I find out that the one feature, the primary feature of the app, I'm unable to do. So.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So moving along, some of the frustrations, as I alluded to earlier, the Accessibility Inspector is a tool that Apple provides, and I found that it's not the most useful tool, and I'm just going to give you a quick demo of that. I'm going to share my desktop real quick. And I assume, Sharon, you can see what I'm looking at. What I have on the phone is a simulator, what I'm moving around right now. And it's, as you can see, it's an iPhone 5S simulator. So this is simulating what if I were running this app on a 5S. And this is a very simple app that I quickly developed prior to this webinar. It's just a Hello app with a simple text box and an enter button, and there's a label that's hidden. As you can see, this window here is the Accessibility Inspector. And so basically what it does is, as I move my mouse over objects on my screen, the Accessibility Inspector will change and give you all the information, all the attributes, the actions, and the hierarchy from along the top of the window. So as I hover over the text field, you can see hopefully you can see, I'm sorry if it's small, I know that sometimes these things are difficult to see, but you can see that the first attribute is accessibility enabled, and you can see that it's yes. Going down, is it focused? No. There's a title, and it says this is a label. If I go down to accessibility value, it says enter your name. That's the placeholder that I put in there. The role description is a text field. If I move my mouse over the button, you can again see, starting from the top of the attributes, that yes, it is enabled. No, it's not focused. The title is enter. If I were to change that within Xcode and rerun this app within the simulator, that would change. That value would change. So again, this is the Accessibility Inspector. It is what it is. As far as a frustration point, it's not that frustrating, but from a developer usefulness, it's not very. Again, when we get into Xcode, everyththing is spelled out for you in the Attribute Inspector. You don't really, I found very little use of the Accessibility Inspector. If any developers out there want to chime in and through the chat and say how, or you're at the end, let us know how you're using the Accessibility Inspector and how it's benefited your work. I'd be happy to take that input. Scott.
Why don't we go ahead and take just a few moments here and see if there's any questions from anyone.
And Frank and Scott, this is Sharon. I just want to remind everybody that they can go into full screen mode or use the zoom in mode to follow your desktop. That will make it bigger so that if they're having trouble seeing it.
Do we have any questions, Sharon?
I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay. Okay, we'll continue on then. So I just want to remind people, go ahead and pose your questions as they come to your mind, and then we'll be taking periodic breaks and identifying and answering those questions for you. Okay, continue on, Frank.
Okay. So again, I'm gonna go back and share my screen, and the title of the slide is, building a non-accessible app. And I'm gonna use the example that I've already shown and just go over the real basics of the accessibility attributes window. I'm just gonna go share my screen. Okay, so here I am So again, to review, this is the iPhone 5S simulator that I'm running this app on, and then behind it is my Xcode development application where I'm able to develop the app and then run it. The buttons and windows over here are help the developer, and it's basically a GUI, an interface where there's no code involved. Everything is clicking buttons and then typing into text boxes. There is an interface where later on I will go over and show you how we built this simple app. But for right now, we're just looking at the storyboard, which has objects on it. And the three objects that I alluded to earlier were the text, the input text field, the button, and a hidden label. And again, this is just simple hello world, or I think I've called it hello Sharon, just to make it nice. So as I select items and I move over to the identity inspector, at the bottom of that we have what's, if you can see, the accessibility section. And just running through it, I typed in the label, and I think we did talk about what the label and the hint were. The accessibility enabled button is basically, if you uncheck that, the object will not be read by VoiceOver. There are certain times maybe we've done that in the past, Scott. I can't remember off the top of my head where we wouldn't want VoiceOver to be recognizing an object. But this is basically, if you turn this off, it becomes inaccessible. The label, the hint, and then again the traits are beneath it. We'll all describe, and VoiceOver will read it, and I'll go through that in just a few minutes. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. And are there any questions so far about the accessibility section with an identity inspector?
We do have 2 questions. Would you like me to read them to you?
Sure.
Okay, so Craig asks, how does Apple introduce accessibility to a developer after they get started installing Xcode, etc., or do developers just find it on their own?
That's a good question, and at the end of the presentation I have a few links that go to the Apple documents. If nothing else, Apple provides a lot of information, and it's a lot of good information that's easily consumed by developers, and part of that information is the accessibility documentation that they provide. So Apple doesn't push out information in terms of developers. They're not going to invite you to take classes, but they put everything out there for you to consume if you choose to. So the answer to the question is developers need to go read the documentation. There's also a pretty wide support for developers through other resources, through other websites that technical developers use for questions and assistance. I find myself using those all the time.
And then we have a question from the team at the University of Illinois, and they ask, what tools do you use to control the read order of the elements in your apps?
There's the ability to programmatically, at least this is what I've done for our NFB app, is to we are able to within the code. I can't remember off the top of my head which attribute it is, but we're able to set the order for the swipe to move from top to bottom, and that's with using the typical left-right gesture. So there's no tool that I actually use. It's just within the program, within Objective-C, there are some coding that you can control. That would be a great feature for Apple to put into the GUI. So that what we're looking at right now, if there was an order, that would be useful. But as of right now, I'm doing everything in the back end.
And then another question, is the swipe gesture a result of tab order?
I believe so, yes. Scott, do you have any info on that?
No.
Okay.
Okay, that's
So-
it for questions right now.
All right, so I'm going to go through and I'm just going to reproduce building this app real quick, and let's hope I can do it. So I'm going to go ahead and in my Xcode, I'm going to create a new project. And I'm going to, along the left-hand side, we have an iOS application, and I'm going to use a single view application. And as you can see, there's other options there, but for this purpose, we're just going to use a very simple single view. I'm going to call this Hello Scott. And I'm going to use Objective-C as my language. I'm going to use it, I'm going to develop it for the iPhone. I'm clicking next. I'm going to save it to my desktop. I'm not going to use a Git repository. And once I have it saved, you can see, hopefully you can see along the left-hand side, and again, I apologize for if it's very small. You can see I have several files. I only need 2 files that are pertinent to this demonstration. That's my view controller, and you can see I have some code here. I have pre-typed some of the code, and I'll go over that real briefly. We have 2 properties that we're going to use for this demonstration, and if you can see, one is a label, and I called it message label, and one is a text field, and I called it input field. So I'm just going to copy that and put that into my interface. And then the other bit of code is just an action, and I called it enter. So when we press on the button, we want an action to be performed. Within this action, I've assigned some 3 strings: your name, my name, a message, and then I put in some conditional statements. If there's nothing in my name in the text box and I hit enter, my name will default to world. If my name is equal to the variable my name, which is set to Frank, the message will be hello Frank, we have the same name, and then the message hello, which I've misspelled, going to fix that, which is the default will be, if it's not Frank, it's just going to say hello, whatever you put in there. So as you can see, there's nothing in terms of accessibility that I'm putting in here. As far as code, this is very simple Objective-C code, nothing to do with accessibility from the back end. So I pasted that into my implementation within the view controller. I'm then going to the second file that I mentioned that is important. That's my storyboard, and this may look familiar because this is what we were looking at before when we looked at the identity inspector. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my 3 objects on there. I'm going to put my text box or text field, and I'm just clicking and dragging that over to the center. I'm going to put a button on there. And I'm just going to put that beneath the text field, and I'm going to make that text field a little wider. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a label. I can put it anywhere I want. I'll put it just above the text box, and I'll make that, again, wider and align it. I need to assign this button to that action that I created in the code. So I'm just dragging this button over here, and I'm going to call it, the event is enter. And I'm going to do the same thing from the top, and I'm going to identify this label as the message label that I created, that property that I put up on top of the code. And I'm going to do the same thing for the text field, and the property name is input field. And I'll just show you back at that code to remind you that here are the two properties, which is the message label and input field. And then here is the enter. So very simple code. The storyboard is there. All my properties are set. I can change this button value to enter. I can add a placeholder for this, for the text box. So my placeholder could be enter your name. And my label, I can just delete this so that it doesn't show up until the enter button is pressed. So if I want to test this as my simulator, I have a choice. My phone is also connected to the computer, and it's showing up as iPhone 3. I also have a list of simulators. I'm I'm just going to choose the iPhone 5S, and I'm going to run the code that I did. So my simulator will come up. I will type in my name, Frank. I will press on the enter, and it says, "Hello, Frank. We have the same." And it's actually concatenated it because my text field is too wide, or my fonts are too big. But you can see that it is functioning as I intended it to function. How is this accessible? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually run this on my cell phone, and I'm going to show. I'm going to hopefully it'll come across the line enough, and I'm going to turn on VoiceOver and run through the actual app. Now, before I do that, though, I'm going to go and take a look at our Identity Inspector again. And you can see as I click on the text field, the accessibility enabled checkbox is checked. I have nothing in the label, I have nothing in the hint, I have nothing in the identifying. I haven't done anything to this. As you've seen, this is a brand new project, and basically this is by default. Again, developers don't need to do anything. So I'm going to run this on my phone, and I understand you can't see me holding my phone, but I am holding a phone. And I'm going to turn on VoiceOver through the triple click.
VoiceOver on. Hello, Scott. Enter your name. Text field.
And so,
Tap to edit.
I'm sorry I interrupted Siri, VoiceOver, but the first thing it said was "Hello, Scott," which is the name of the app that I developed. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just type.
Enter your name. Text field.
So as
Tap to edit.
I keep interrupting it, I'm sorry. I'm going to type it one more time and let it come across.
Enter your name. Text field. Double tap to edit.
So it tells you the text field name, the placeholder, and then the action that it wants you to do. So VoiceOver's done all that without me doing zero effort. I'm going to now tap on the Enter button.
Enter button.
So it just tells you the Enter button. It doesn't tell you to tap or anything. And then I'm going to go ahead and
Enter your name. Text field. Double tap to edit. Text field is editing. Character mode. Enter your name. Insert shift. Triple tap to enter. Selected. Shift. Tab F. Tab F. R. R. A. A. N. N. K. K. Enter. Button. Enter. Hello, Frank. We have the same name.
so I entered my name using the keyboard. I then selected the message, and I'll tap it again so it comes across. And Sharon, just let me know if it's not coming across.
Hello, Frank. We have the same name.
And so you can hear VoiceOver going over the Hello, Frank. So that's me putting a little bit of code in the back and doing absolutely nothing with the accessibility traits, labels, or hints. And so if I wanted to do something with a label, so you can see the label is a label that identifies the accessibility element in a localized string. So if I want to type something in my label, I could do something that describes that element. So currently I'm selected on the text box. I already have a placeholder that's going to read that. Do I need anything else on there? I can put just your first name. If I'm describing the element, I'll just put on your name goes here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and rerun this app.
Table folder. To app. Double tap to open. Hello, Scott. Enter your name. Text field. Double tap to edit. Enter your name. Text field. Double tap to edit.
Okay, did not read it. Let's try that one more time. This is a hint for the text field, and I'm going to do the same thing. And then real quickly run this.
Table folder. To app. Double tap to open. Teams app. Hello, Scott. Your name goes here. Enter your name. Text field. This is a hint. Double tap to edit.
So you've heard the hint.
This is Newton. Button.
This is
Enter
Newton.
hint for the button.
I've misspelled button. and it caught me.
Button. Button. This is a hint for the button.
So you can hear, hopefully you can hear that now the app, by using the label and the hint GUI, will read any additional accessibility information that you want to pass on to the end users. So that is developing a very simple app on using Xcode with using the front end accessibility options. I'm going to go back to the presentation.
Double tap to open. VoiceOver off.
And are there any questions on this so far?
Yes, we had one question, and they asked, when using Xcode as a beginner and working with individuals who have developed apps on a regular basis, are there any additional Xcode applications that you'd recommend? There are a lot of things such as docs for Xcode, project statistics, code snippets, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the code snippets is a wonderful thing, and some of the tools that you mentioned are useful. As far as a beginning developer, I just find the Apple documents is the most useful, and some of the message boards that are built for developers and run by developers. As far as that's my personal take on what helped me getting going.
And then Mark shared some information. He said the WWDC 2014 iOS talk gives a good demo on controlling reading order using UI Accessibility Container and UI Accessibility Element, and he provided a link for that, and the link is developer.apple.com/videos/play/WWDC 2014-210.
Thank you, Mark. That's great, and hopefully some of the other developers out there can chime in with some of the useful tools. Again, this webinar is meant for a very basic beginning audience. So if there are more experienced developers out there, please join in and provide some input in terms of what's helped you develop for the accessible features. So back at the PowerPoint presentation. So we've gone through building, the accessible app using just the GUI, the front end, and the identity inspector, and how easy it is. I've included some developer resources. And Scott, you want to talk, any type of resources that you've had or have used before in terms of learning how to use VoiceOver as a consumer?
Well, I think that probably the number one place I would look at, as Frank has alluded to, is apple.com for developer resources, but also to look at it for actually to understand how VoiceOver works. Apple is pretty good at having, just from a user perspective, is pretty good about having documentation of how you actually use VoiceOver and the other accessible products on their website. So just go there and use the search bar and look for the accessibility type options. And that's number one. Not associated with Apple, but a site that I've used in the past. They have a number of guides. They have podcasts. They have blogs, things like that. And this is coming from more of a consumer perspective. Would be applevis.com, AppleVis.com. And this is not a site that's affiliated with Apple or anything, but it is visually impaired users that are using the Apple products. So by going to the site and reading some of the material there and so forth, and you can actually, put up, questions there about, general questions about accessibility, and they have blogs that people will answer those. Now, I wanted to address, everybody by being here today is interested in making their apps accessible, and we appreciate that very much. Now, how do you link up with actual people that could help you with the testing? In the blindness field, there's going to be a number of people that would be interested in helping you to do this. And the way that I would say that the number one way to be able to go ahead and link up with these folks would be able to go, if you go ahead and drop me an email. My email address is swhite, swhite, at nfb.org, like NFB, National Federation Blind, swhite at nfb.org. I'll go ahead and give my phone number as well, 410-659-9314, and my extension is 2231. We have we're a very good source of individuals that would be willing to, if you're interested in getting people to help you beta test your app. Whether it would be maybe with the voiceover as far as from someone that's totally blind like myself to individuals that actually would be using some of the Zoom type features and the large print. As far as persons with other disabilities, we're not an expert in that area, but we can link you up with other organizations that, they are the expert as we are to blindness. So I would encourage you to go ahead and send me an email if you would like to go ahead and start to find beta testers for this, for your particular projects and so forth. Also, after today's webinar, I will be available to, if you have any questions. And these could be questions regarding, any type of general accessibility questions or anything that were detailed. I would pass those over to Frank to get a more technical expertise in that. I have a understanding of programming, since that's what I used to do in a former life, but as far as the iOS details and so forth, that's going to be our developer Frank, but I can act as a clearinghouse and get you to the information that you need to get to. So again, that was swhite at nfb.org.
So Scott, why don't we talk a little bit about the NFB app and our journey through that, because we've been working on that for several years now.
Right, we introduced NFB Newsline Mobile in 2012. Is when it first came out, and we've done a lot of development on it since that time. I know when we first started working out the app, we had one presentation obstacle to run across, and we did that at first. Is the way that, since we have a vast amount of information to display in those 400 publications, how can we go ahead and display it that makes sense? And one of the tenets of NFB Newsline is that you be able to go ahead and search out and find the information very quickly. So we devised techniques working in the Apple framework that would allow us to go ahead and jump from article to article. We want to design NFB Newsline like a sighted person would be looking at information. So if you start looking at an article and you decide, oh, I don't want to read any more about that, don't need to know about that, you quickly jump to the next one. So we want to have some facilities that we did that. And we tried a couple of techniques. The one that we decided on eventually, and Frank could speak to more how this is done technically, but the one from a user perspective that we decided on was basically we're using the header note navigation. In VoiceOver there is a technique called rotor, and it has several different options. And you can think of the rotor as if you put two fingers on the screen like you were twisting a knob and twist it to the left or to the right, and then it's going to say, different options. One of those is headings. So basically each one of the articles we make at a heading level 3, and that way you're able to do a swipe up and down once you have the rotor set it to headings, and that's how we move from article to article. There have been things where we've had to, once we've looked at the buttons and so forth, we just went back and, had to relabel some of those and so forth. But I think that once we got the basic format and everything down, that, it's been, a very enjoyable and, not really a stressful project to go ahead and add the accessibility. As Frank was showing you earlier, there are some things that work straight out the box. There's other things that you're going to have to go ahead and put some thought behind that and make sure that they work properly. And really, you're never going to really know that they work efficiently until you either have VoiceOver on and you go ahead and test them yourself, or have beta testers. The best thing is to go ahead and, of course, have the beta testers. The problems with that will be very quickly illustrated by the beta testers to you. If you want to go ahead, if you're interested in taking a look at the NFB Newsline mobile app, our NFB Newsline service is a service that provides copyrighted material, and we can only provide that to eligible individuals. Anyone attending the seminar today can go ahead and drop me an email, and we can give you a code, and that code will allow you to go ahead and, of course, you can download our app from the App Store without this code, but you can put the code in, and that will allow you to go ahead and look from a user perspective of how the app actually works. And I will go ahead and, if I were to give you a code now, I will go ahead and extend that for about 2 weeks, so to around the 1st of November, 2015. So if anybody would like that, they can drop me an email, swhite@nfb.org, and that will give them a look at actually what we're talking about with NFB Newsline Mobile.
And Scott, I thought I'd share my screen just one more time and just take a look at some of the back-end code for the NFB app. I'm going to share my screen, and again, I'll apologize for if it's difficult to see. But here's some back-end code from our from an older copy of our app. What I did is I just searched for the word accessibility, and Xcode does a pretty good job at searching all through the code, and it's listed pages in different places where the word accessibility comes up in the back end. So you can see here I have all I'm doing with this line of code is I'm adding the accessibility label straight to a button that I'm dynamically creating. So it's not something I'm going to do on the GUI. I'm going to do it in the code, and I load this button programmatically based on some kind of condition. If a user clicks a button, then maybe something else will happen. And so this accessibility label is, it says successfully added publication to your favorite. So one of the features within the NFB Newsline app is you can create a list of favorites. So if you want New York Times to be on a short list that you have easy access to, you can choose New York Times to be on your favorites. Same thing with USA Today or any other publication that you choose. And then again, these accessibilities. So if I move down the list, my search results list, again, there's lots of labels that I'm putting on here that I'm dynamically creating. If I move down to a different file, I've got actually an alignment, which if you see the yellow text, it's actually depreciated, and that's one of the interesting things about developing an app and maintaining it for several years. You go along the wave that Apple is generating through its different iterations. It's coming up with a new set of code every year. And so your app needs to kind of stay on top of that wave, or else it's going to crash on top of you. And it does a good job at telling you when things are first depreciated, and then along the lines, each iteration will give you different types of warnings, whether it's going to be phased out completely. And then eventually, if you don't fix it, if someone will not be able to load that app on a newer device. So we're constantly, again, with a longer project life cycle, it's something that is just we go through iterations of development. I'm appreciative of Apple and its information. So as I move down, excuse me, I've got a UI accessibility post notification, which is different from the other notifications that are dependent on an action. And so this is actually telling me that I'm going to post something to a different view or to a different object. Here's a notification that's just simply giving me an announcement that download is complete. So if I download a publication, if I want to read a magazine article offline, so if I have an iPod that is only connected to Wi-Fi, but I want to read this article on the subway home or somewhere where I don't have internet access, I can download that article through the app. And this is an action that the GUI will not provide that information, the download complete. It's something I need to do in the back end. So again, it's very, very easy. And learning how to do these things Scott tells me, we want a message that says download complete, and it's not difficult to figure that out using the Apple documentation. Just looking at a couple more, you can, again, looking at accessibility elements and turning them on and off in the code is not very difficult to do. Sharon, can you tell me, are you able to see the text that's highlighted here?
We can see the highlight, but again, I want to remind everybody, I know it's hard to see, so it's probably best if you go into full screen mode in order to see the section that's being highlighted. You might want to, Frank, it might be best to describe it because we may have some people who are connected via the phone only.
Okay. And please nudge me if I neglect to do that. But I'm going to move on down the list to see if there's anything interesting here with the accessibilities. Again, I've got one here that's it's a button message. So and then the message is tap here for the detail. That is an example of something that I can do in the GUI, but I chose here to do it in the back end. And as a developer, I prefer to do everything in the code. I have more control over it, and I understand it better. If I need to go to the GUI and make changes, a lot of times that the code will not be reflected in something that I can see and modify. So, as a developer with accessibility, I prefer to do things within the code rather than the GUI. That's something for a different type of webinar, if you will. For this beginning accessibility webinar, I think using the GUI and showing how easy it is to really to make things accessible on an iPhone app, I think that was what our intent was. So moving down the line, we have the app uses a lot of XML from a server that it takes from. And that XML we parse and put into an object, and then we load that information into different screens or views and objects. And making it accessible, again, is very easy to do using the code and the front end, actually. More post notifications. And again, we have an audio switch, so if you don't want alerts to happen, you can turn that off with a swipe of a switch, and then we have that made that accessible. Moving down the line, more labels. So as you can see, the delete accessibility label will say delete an existing favorite or publication. So if you want to add, you can add. If you want to remove, you can remove. We, as developers, we just need to put what those labels are, and it will be read once VoiceOver is turned on. Scott, do you have anything to add in terms of the how we've gone along with Apple's iterations and tried, whether we played catch up or we were ahead of the game?
Now, in designing our NFB Newsline mobile app, obviously we have the customers that we're serving are going to be blind, so we've had an extreme high focus on the VoiceOver accessibility. What I've noticed just in the general marketplace of apps is, do not assume that because once you have your app accessible in the next iteration of the app that it's going to maintain accessibility. Now, I don't know the technical ins or out what happens with this behind the scenes, because these are other apps that are just I download from the App Store. However, I know that it's of extreme frustration for someone that is a VoiceOver user to say, okay, well, I can use your app today and it works fine, and now you've developed all these new features that I really love. I read what's new. I'd love to use all these things. I download it and it's broken. I mean, I can't even perform the primary functions. So I think it's very important to go ahead and do regression testing and even test back on the other features that you've had already in the app, just to make sure that all the accessibility functions that you intended still work in the final product.
So I'll go over a couple of the websites that I've listed. So the first one I've done is the developer to apple.com. I've included the accessibility in iOS as the routes, but I'll show you. If you start at the root Actually, am I sharing my screen, Sharon?
No, in order to show the websites, you need to go
Okay.
into desktop sharing. If you just
No problem.
click on the links, only you are going into that web page.
Got it. I think I knew that. So here I am. I'm assuming you see it now. This is the main developer Apple.website, and I'm assuming a lot of you have already been here and know what this is about. But if you can quickly go into resources, and it's going to give you lots of different choices of information. But if I want to just go into my accessibility information, I can go into there, and then it's got accessibility for developers, and it can give you information in terms of OS X, which is a whole nother animal. But Apple does a great job at making that. It's a little more difficult for the programming accessibility for the laptop than it is the iOS device. Any other developers out there, you may want to chime in and let me know what your experience is comparing developing accessible apps for OS X versus iOS. I found it a little more challenging for the OS X. But again, once you're in the accessibility for developers area, you have accessibility information at your fingertips. If you are a member, you can there is just a wealth of information in terms of their resources above and beyond what the general public would have. And so yeah, there's tons there. So another website. Scott mentioned it, and he didn't realize that I was on the same.
We just lost your screen, Frank.
Okay, I'm getting it back. The Apple Viz website is great, which I've listed here. Sorry, Shannon, I'm just going to go back, Sharon. So again, the Apple Viz website is useful. If you're looking for information in terms of accessibility for cutting edge stuff, including the watch, these guys do a really good job at doing it, and they have they include a lot of videos, and yeah, the information is quite rich. Any other resources that you would like to talk about, Scott?
I think you pretty much covered it there. Why don't we go ahead and see if there's any text questions, and also if anyone has any verbal questions.
So there was one question posted a few minutes ago from the team at the University of Illinois, and then Craig provided some information, but why don't I read the original question and see if there's anything that you want to add to it or to the answer. So the question is, does Rotor allow you to jump to different heading levels, or is it between headings of the same level?
Okay, currently on VoiceOver now in other operating systems like Mac OS X, it operates different. On the iPhone, you cannot differentiate between heading levels. So it's, for example, once I go ahead and set my rotor to headings, and then I'm going to swipe down, I'm going to go to a level 2, let's say, heading level 2, and I'm just interested in heading level 2s. I cannot do that. I would have to go to the next heading level. So it may be a 3 that would be next. Then it may jump back to a 2. So I cannot determine if I want to stay on just the 2s. Often, probably I would have it set, if we could differentiate between heading levels, is I would have it when a person looks at the full publication, I would have it like we do on the website, where if you're looking at the individual sections in the newspaper, it would be heading level 2 and the articles would be at 3. That way I could jump from 2 to 2 and go from section to section. But currently VoiceOver does not allow any discrimination between going to different heading level. A heading is a heading.
Great. And I don't see any other new questions yet, so let's open up. As Frank and Scott said, they've really allowed a lot of time for you all to ask questions. Perhaps you're working on some apps and there might be some specifics with the situation you're working on that you want to either share with them or ask them questions about. So if you can, go ahead and type in your question into the chat area, or if you are connected via the phone, you can press #6 to unmute your line and ask your question over the phone. If you're in Adobe Connect and using Voice over IP, if you want me to unmute your microphone so that you can ask a question verbally, just type into the chat area that you have a question, or just type in, please unmute me, and I will unmute your microphone. So let's give it a minute to see if people have some questions. And I can see that some people are typing their questions. There we go. So Kristen asks, when developing an app as a developer or end user, what do you think is the trickiest or hardest part of ensuring accessibility of the app?
From a developer's point of view, I would say that the trickiest part is just making sure that all of the code that you are developing as a sighted person or for sighted people just comes back and is providing the same type of experience for someone who is visually impaired. And that's just going through due diligence. If you're using the code, is just making sure that if it's an interactive element, that interactive element clearly describes, what is going on. The demonstration today, we talked about labels and buttons. So those are very basic features of an app. When we talk about some of the videos and some of the interactive things that more advanced apps do, making sure that the experience is the same just making sure of that is, I would say, the trickiest part as a developer. Scott, as a consumer?
Okay. The only thing that I would have to say there is really just a little bit different, but I would say even things like if you're designing your app and you have your logos and things like that, and things that are going to be pictorial in nature, you still want to go ahead and provide a brief description for that. Just similar to what should be done, like if any of you all have developed websites where you have the alt tag. Basically, I'm talking about the same thing, where you should have, when you run across a logo and somebody runs their finger across it, it should say what that, the logo or whatever the company is, whatever the project particularly is, whatever you want to say that identifies that logo, but it should do something verbally. And I would say also, after you turn on the voiceover, you want to make sure that it stops on every element that's there. That's one problem that I've seen in a lot of apps that provide accessibility challenges. I've also seen where it may actually stop on an element, but it doesn't say anything. When you move from element to element, when you have voiceover on, if you haven't changed the setting, you will hear a little click. And there's some apps that I will run across, and I'll just hear it go click, click, click. And what it's doing is it's going from element to element, but for some reason they haven't identified any label there, so I'm not hearing any text. So I would just say be cognizant of those types of issues.
And also along those lines, again, we talked about it earlier, and someone posed a good question about, the order, the swipe order. So again, that as a programmer, and you want to be able to assist with that order, that could be easily overlooked. And if you're not testing it and with VoiceOver and actually going through it, you may jump from the top to the bottom, and again, that's not going to be very useful to the user.
And I guess just to reemphasize, because it's really, really important, is, it's nice to have pretty much any platform that you're developing for. It's nice that, these accessibility tools have been built in, and just use those as a guideline. Nothing replaces actually having actual beta testers that have the disabilities that are going to actually be using it, and because that's the real world test, and they're just going to give you extremely good feedback on that.
Okay, and we have a question from Laurie. She says, Frank, can you please talk about your use of accessibility trait when designing controls?
All right, so for us, we use the accessibility trait to, we choose the best description for what, an element is and what the application does. And so we set the traits, the property, so that the user doesn't get confused when clicking on a text field that opens a web browser. For instance, it's not going to open up a web browser, it's a text field. So we use it just for basic, making it clear on what these objects are.
Okay, and then a question from Craig is, as a new developer myself, what would you recommend would be the best methods to find beta testers with varying disabilities, and how would you reward or compensate them for their time?
Well, Craig, I'm for hire if you want me to test your. No, I'm just kidding. But I think Scott has a good answer for that.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I think when it comes to VoiceOver and anyone with any site limitation, that we can link you up with a good resources of people across the country. The National Federation of the Blind, at its heart and soul, is a member organization, and of course not all these people are VoiceOver users, but just a membership of our organization, just to give you the idea of the depth of the organization. We have 50,000 members across the U.S. So out of those members, we have a number that are, we have people that would be sort of the entry-level novices on VoiceOver, as well as we could work with you and get more expert people that have had experience with VoiceOver and just using adaptive technology through the many years. Now, as far as with other disabilities, we are not the experts in that area. However, we do know persons in other organizations that we could link you up with. So we would be a referral in that case, and we could assist you in the case of VoiceOver and persons using Zoom.
And as far as sharing with testers, there's a lot of tools out there. I think we're using Fabric right now to share our apps as we develop with our beta users. So and Apple has its own built-in that they just implemented about 6 months ago to share the apps. We currently we're using a third party just because we found it easier to share with users with older devices. Apple forces you to use the new device with their beta test platform. At least that's what it was when we first looked at it. So again, sharing with your beta testers, Craig, I think it was Craig who answered the question, is really easy to do. Finding them to do it and compensating them, I wouldn't see that as a hurdle, but technically there's no hurdles to sharing.
Now that brings up a good point. The testing environments, don't always assume that the testing environment that you're using to install the app is going to be accessible either. Most of I've used a couple of different testing environments for different projects. Of course, ours here for NFB Newsline, and I'm a beta tester for a couple other apps that are in development. And really, either I found them to be accessible or maybe some sort of workaround. That workaround I've had to share with maybe some of the other beta testers so they can actually get around that, because once the downfall of the accessibility of the test environment app is basically just transferring the app to the device. So, we get that accomplished. Maybe the button won't be labeled, and I'll have to explain to somebody, you need to go up to the top of the screen, swipe down 3 times, and that button that's not labeled there, that's the button that you use. And then, of course, they can test for accessibility on your app once they get it installed to their device. Regarding compensation, I would say that whatever compensation that you normally provide for any type of beta testers, I know that people, at least the folks that I'm involved with, are very anxious to help developers because we want to have accessible apps. We want to be able to use the same technology that everyone else does. I mean, it's great to, there is, just to give you an example, on a personal note, there is, there's apps where today where you can play word games or dice games or some type of game like that that would translate into be able to use in speech. And so, up until recently, I hadn't been able to find an app that would allow me to do that with my sighted friends. So it's a part of social interaction. So persons with disabilities want to have the same social interaction opportunities, but not having an accessible app knocks us out of the marketplace of being able to do that. So I would say that people are just going to be very eager to help you, but I would just offer them the same compensation that you're offering, the general marketplace.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions being entered, so I think you've covered all of the questions that our attendees had today. So I just want to thank Frank and Scott. I want to thank both of you for doing a great job and sharing this information with the audience today. So thank you so much for putting this together for us. And I also want, oh, you're quite welcome. And I also want to thank our captionist, Annette Blau from TCS Interpreting, who always does a great job for us, keeping up with all of this technical information. I don't know how she does it, but she does a great job. So thank you, Annette. So just a couple of wrap-up things that I want to share with all of you. First off, I hope that at least some of you are joining us next week at the first IAAP Access 2015 conference. It's being held in Henderson, Nevada, outside of Las Vegas. If you're not able to join us at the conference, we are planning to record the sessions and make the recordings available for purchase after the conference concludes. So hopefully you can join us. If not in person, you can join us through the recordings. And then I want to put up our feedback survey. We always welcome your input both on the webinar series from IAAP in total and also today's webinar. So there is a link on your screen that you can click, and that will take you directly to the feedback survey. We will also be sending out a webinar email within the next day or two that will have the link to the feedback survey, in addition to a link to the recording for today's webinar. So we do provide that to all the attendees. And I want to let you know that we do have 2 more webinars through the end of the year. On November 3rd, we have latest developments in accessible math in browsers and ebooks. And on December 9th, we're going to have a webinar called PDF Accessibility Beyond the Basics. That's a new addition to our webinar schedule, so I don't believe it's on the website quite yet, but it should be up there shortly. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in attending that webinar. And then we'll be posting the 2016 schedule within the next few weeks. So hopefully some more great things for you to join us in 2016. So with that, we have, I'm sorry, did someone say something?
Yes, when you get finished, Sharon, I just have a final concluding comments.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so again, thank you for everyone taking their time today. I just want to reiterate some contact information. My email address, swhite@nfb.org. Remember, if you're interested in obtaining a special code that you can use for about 2 weeks or so for the NFB Newsline Mobile, just to see it from a user perspective of what it looks like, drop me an email. My phone number, if you need to call me, is 410-659-9314, extension 2231. If you would like to get in touch with beta testers, you can go ahead and drop me an email as well, and we'll be able to work with you on getting some people that you can work with. So if you want more information about the National Federation of the Blind, that can be found at www.nfb.org. NFB Newsline, to get more information about that, is www.nfbnewsline.org. And again, thank you for everyone today, and I want to thank IAAP and also Sharon for facilitating this today.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you again, Frank. So with that, the only last thing I want to mention is, as we have been doing with our 2015 webinars, is for those of you who are members of IAAP, we will open up a community in the IAAP Connections, so that if you want to continue the conversation about developing apps, you can do that there. And lastly, I just want to let everyone know that to log out of the webinar today, all you need to do is close your browser and hang up the phone if you're connected via the phone. So pretty simple to log out. So with that, again, thank you, Frank and Scott, for doing a great job. Thank you to all of the attendees for joining us today. Have a great day, and I hope to see you at a future IAAP webinar. Thanks so much.